Obrigado, Dr. John. Thank you very much, Dr. John. Nesse momento, eu passo a palavra ao superintendente executivo do IES, Dr. Luiz Augusto Carneiro, que vai moderar os comentários do nosso palestrante com os convidados e as perguntas feitas pela plateia. Lembramos mais uma vez que ainda há tempo de formularem suas perguntas e encaminharem às nossas recepcionistas, ok? Obrigado.
John, muito obrigado pela sua apresentação, foi realmente muito interessante, trouxe vários conhecimentos, né, e a experiência da Austrália. Para começar, tem uma pergunta que eu gostaria de fazer. Está funcionando a tradução? Vou fazer. Yes. Okay, so I'll ask questions in English. Okay, it's going to be translated to Portuguese to the audience. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Maybe here. Obrigado. A primeira pergunta, falando sobre essas projeções da Austrália, né, que é o Intergenerational Report, o relatório intergeracional, uma pergunta, entendemos que como ele foi produzido, todas as suas premissas e a sua importância. Agora, uma pergunta, ele, dentro do governo australiano, né, estou falando do setor de saúde, de previdência, de educação, os resultados desse modelo eles estão disseminados em todos os setores do governo australiano para tomada de decisão, ou seja, tem um alinhamento, né, com base nessas projeções para políticas públicas?
So much choice of microphones. I think that the major contribution of the intergenerational report is to raise it's twofold. It's to raise the awareness of the general population about the implications of demographic change, so that there is greater acceptance of the idea when policy change is put forward that this is something which needs to happen because of the changing demographic, that the changing demographic is, might be moving slowly, but it's moving inevitably, and it's important to have a response. So that's the first thing. And that occurs mainly through media. So the media use the intergenerational report in opinion pieces. When it comes out, there's always some media stories around the new projections. So generally, it just permeates society as something where there needs to be some concern. I think the second point is that when it comes to political decision-making, a particular minister might want to argue very strongly for increased expenditures, for example, on aged care. But there is an implicit discipline in cabinet discussions because you have all the other demographic change statistics to confront. And so the health minister will say, well, I mean, it's all very well for you in aged care, but look at what's happening in health. I could argue for increases in health expenditure along the same lines. And so it gives a kind of discipline, a framework within which these kinds of policy decisions can be taken, which give somewhat greater consistency to political decisions than might otherwise be the case.
Ok, muito obrigado. Eu recebi 2 perguntas aqui, mas elas são mais relacionadas à saúde pública. Eu vou guardar elas aqui especialmente para o professor Campino, que vai fazer a apresentação sobre saúde, e até o mês depois, que estão mais relacionadas aos próximos painéis, né? Então, apenas para terminar aqui a sessão de perguntas, eu gostaria de falasse um pouco sobre o Centro de Estudos, about CIPAR, sobre o Centro de Excelência em Pesquisa do Envelhecimento e como isso é feito, porque é interessante, porque esse centro ele tem uma equipe multidisciplinar que discute esses assuntos, são apenas economistas.
So thank you very much for that opportunity. I have a belief that population aging and climate change are the 2 biggest social issues of this century worldwide. And an enormous amount of multidisciplinary and coordinated research is devoted to climate change, whereas demographic change receives relatively little attention. So a few years ago, I began an initiative to try to get major funding for a multidisciplinary team to investigate population aging, with something of an Australian focus, but definitely a global perspective. And I was successful in raising that funding. So we have, as principal investigators, we have 3 economists, but we also have a demographer, an epidemiologist, an actuary, a psychologist, a sociologist. And that gives us many perspectives to bring to bear on this issue. I think one of the major contributions that the Centre is making is that we have a large number of postdoctoral fellows, people who've come out of PhDs in one of these disciplines, demography or economics or actuarial studies. And they work alongside other young research fellows from different disciplines. And so that interaction at that young stage of these people's careers gives them a far richer perspective of what other disciplines are contributing to this issue than people of my age ever had, where I only ever talked with economists until I was 50 years old. As well as that, we run conferences, we run seminars, and so forth. So there are a lot of different activities, but the core activity, I think, is our research, and in particular, the building of research capacity with this emphasis on an awareness of the multidisciplinary perspectives which a proper understanding of demographic change requires.
Obrigado, John. Mais uma pergunta. Teve uma pergunta sobre como é o cuidado domiciliar para o idoso na Austrália e se há resultados econômicos sobre isso, né? Se é isso, o impacto econômico disso, né? Se isso reduz o custo dos tratamentos com o idoso, quais são os benefícios?
If I understand the question, is what are the mechanisms for trying to control the aged care budget? I think everyone wants to, the phrase that the aged care people use is aging in English, is aging in place. So people wish to age in their own homes where they can, spend as much time in their own homes before having to be moved into some institutional facility. And certainly the thrust of the new aged care policy in Australia is to try to facilitate that as far as possible. And that is done in a number of ways. It's done by providing a lot of professional support in the community, so people will come by each day and help out. They'll do shopping, that kind of thing. There's coordination with family members so that the support is there, and the family members, the younger family members who are also providing support, this coordination between the professional and the family members so that care is provided on a more or less smooth basis. I think perhaps underexploited is the use of IT techniques. Information technology has an enormous role to play in aged care, also actually in healthcare, in controlling chronic disease, but in aged care specifically, because you can use these devices to monitor people's blood pressure, to monitor their heart rate, to figure out how many times they've opened the refrigerator during a day. And that information means that people can live on their own with more and more disability, and would prefer to. Most people would prefer to do that. So I think that does reduce the residential care costs very substantially, I think. So they're the major thrusts. There was an OECD report which came out in 2005, and it laid out much of what I'm saying, that people really do prefer to age in place, and that this might be a good way of trying to control the burgeoning fiscal cost of aged care.
Outra pergunta relacionada a esse tema, se esses programas de cuidado domiciliar para o idoso, eles são programas governamentais do governo, da saúde pública, ou também programas do setor privado?
In Australia, we're talking about government programs, so there's support both by the federal government, and we have a number of states in Australia, the state government. One of the major difficulties, I think, that aged care policy has confronted in Australia is that there are all these fights between the jurisdictions. So should the Commonwealth government pay, or should the state government pay, that kind of thing. With this new policy that I mentioned, it's about to unroll, that will be concentrated. Those kinds of disputes will go away, and I'm therefore hopeful that into the future we'll be able to develop policies, government policies, which have a greater degree of coordination and system to them than we have in the past. To give you an example, you can think of different levels of care, right? There is low care, where people can more or less live independently, but they have access to medical facilities, and they have access to food, there's a restaurant, and so forth. Think of high care, where you need nursing care all the time. So as things stood historically in Australia, there was no coordination between these two forms of care. So if you had an elderly relative, you might place them in low care. If they subsequently needed to move to high care, they may have to move to a completely different part of the city. That seems crazy. Right? So I'm hoping that with this new policy we'll get greater coordination of transitions through this last part of people's lives.
Ok, João, muito obrigado pelas suas respostas. Acho que as perguntas foram todas relacionadas a esse tema, né? As demais são sobre saúde pública aqui no Brasil. No outro painel nós conseguimos inserir. Então gostaria de agradecer mais uma vez o Dr. John, né, com uma salva de palmas.
Agradecemos uma vez mais ao Dr. John e também ao Dr. Luiz. Chamo na sequência o professor Dr. Caizô Beltrão, professor da Escola Brasileira de Administração Pública e de Empresas, EBAP, FGV, Rio de Janeiro. Ele apresentará a palestra Envelhecimento Populacional e os Custos da Previdência Social. Senhoras e senhores, aguardaremos alguns instantes. Tivemos uma queda de energia e estamos tentando recuperar o projetor. Um momento, por gentileza, ok?